always believed that our lives are built on a series of quiet, almost invisible decisions, the kind that don't seem like much until you look back and see how they've altered your entire course. I'm sitting here tonight, the house finally quiet, and the rain tapping a familiar, insistent rhythm against the window pane, thinking about the one decision that almost undid everything I've worked for. It's been years, but I can still feel the weight of it, the way it settled in my chest like a secret I wasn't quite ready to let go of. People often look at my life and see a portrait of stability. They see the house in the suburbs, the long-term marriage, and the career that I navigated with such careful, calculated precision. They ask me for the secret to a solid life, and for a long time I gave them the easy answers: communication, patience, shared goals. But the truth is much messier. The truth is that my stability was bought with a moment of terrifying, heart-stopping vulnerability in a cabin that smelled of damp cedar and old memories. The air in that kitchen was thick, heavy with the scent of the rain-damp redwoods outside, and the lingering, smoky warmth of a dying fire in the hearth. But it was the heat radiating off Julian's skin that made my breath hitch in my throat. We were standing so close in the narrow galley that I could feel the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest. A slow, steady tide that seemed to pull at my own oxygen. Outside, the Northern California coast was being hammered by a late October storm, the wind howling through the trees like a restless ghost. But inside, the silence was absolute, vibrating with a tension that made the hair on my arms stand up. I could see the tiny golden flecks in his irises as he looked down at me, his gaze unblinking and heavy with a decade's worth of unspoken things. My hand was resting on the marble counter, just centimeters from his, and the space between us felt alive, a charged current that threatened to snap at any moment. I wasn't Sarah the professional, the woman who organized her life into color-coded spreadsheets and prided herself on her composure. In this kitchen, under the amber glow of the single bulb, I was just a woman on the precipice of a memory I had spent 10 years trying to bury under the floorboards of my soul. Julian was the one person who could always see through the architecture of my life. We had met when the world felt like a series of open doors, back in our art school days, when the only thing that mattered was the intensity of a brush stroke or the way the light hit the Berkeley hills at dusk. We were fire and gasoline then, a beautiful, chaotic collision of dreams and late-night drives through the fog. I remember the smell of his studio, a mix of turpentine and expensive cigarettes, and the way he would look at a canvas with the same terrifying intensity he was currently directed at me. But I had been the one to walk away. I was terrified of how much he saw of me, how he could strip away my defenses with a single look and find the girl who was scared of her own potential. I chose a quieter path, a man named Mark who was steady and kind, a life that didn't leave me breathless and exhausted every morning. Mark was the man who held the ladder while I climbed, the one who made sure the bills were paid and the cars were serviced, the one who loved me in a way that felt like a warm blanket on a cold night. But Julian was the lightning strike that made you realize how dark the world had been before the flash. A chance encounter at a gallery opening in the city had led to this catch-up weekend at his family's old cabin. I told myself it was about closure, about proving to myself that the girl who loved Julian was a relic of the past. I spent the first few hours talking about my mortgage, my promotion, and the vacation Mark and I were planning for the spring. I kept the conversation safe, transactional, and grounded in the present. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, and the rain began to drum on the roof with a primal ferocity, the safe topics began to feel like a thin veil. The shadows in the cabin grew longer, and the memories started to leak out of the corners. I remembered the way we used to talk about traveling to Italy with nothing but sketchbooks and $50 in our pockets. I remembered the way he used to trace the constellations on the ceiling of his old apartment with a laser pointer while we talked until 3 a.m. about the nature of time. "You're still doing it, Sarah," he whispered now, his voice a low vibration that seemed to settle right in the center of my chest, bypassing my brain entirely. "Doing what?" I asked, my voice barely a thread, my heart thudding a frantic, erratic rhythm against my ribs. I could feel the coolness of the marble under my palm and the heat of him just inches away, a sensory overload that made my head spin. "You're calculating," he said, and he finally closed the gap, his hand covering mine on the counter. His skin was warm, his touch light but certain, sending a jolt through me that felt like a long-forgotten language being spoken for the first time in years. His fingers were calloused from years of working with wood and stone, a texture that felt grounded and real. You're weighing the shoulds against the wants. You're sitting there in your mind, checking off a list of reasons why you shouldn't be standing this close to me. You haven't changed at all. You're still trying to plan your way out of feeling something you can't control. The conflict flared up in me instantly, sharp and cold like a winter wind. I thought of Mark at home, probably sitting in his favorite recliner, checking the weather app and worrying about the drive I'd have to make back through the mountains tomorrow. I felt a wave of guilt so intense it made my stomach turn, a physical sickness born of betrayal. Mark didn't deserve a wife who was standing in a dark kitchen, letting another man trace the outline of her hand. But that guilt was followed quickly by a surge of resentment. Why did Julian get to do this? Why did he get to reach across a decade of my life and remind me of the parts of myself I had successfully silenced? Why did he get to make me feel like the life I had built was a carefully constructed lie? I tried to pull my hand away, but he didn't let go. He didn't grip me either. He just stayed there, a constant grounding presence, waiting for me to make a choice. I have a life, Julian, I said, my voice cracking. It was meant to be a rejection, but it sounded more like a plea for him to stop, or perhaps a plea for him to convince me otherwise. I know you do, he murmured, stepping closer until our chests were nearly touching. I could feel the warmth of his breath against my forehead. He smelled of sandalwood, old paper, and the salt spray from the ocean, a scent that pulled me back to a beach in Big Sur, where we had once spent a whole day watching the tide come in. And I'm not asking you to throw it away. I'm not asking for a revolution, Sarah. I'm just asking you to be honest for 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes where you aren't a wife, or a senior analyst, or a success story for your parents. Just be the girl who used to paint until her fingers bled because she had too much to say. Just be Sarah. He reached up, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw, a gesture so familiar it made my eyes sting with unshed tears. It was a soft grazing touch, but it felt like a brand, a permanent mark on my skin. I felt the vulnerability welling up inside me, that raw, unprotected state I had spent years avoiding with my schedules and my to-do lists. I realized then that my stable life was actually a cage I'd built to keep myself from feeling this exact thing, this terrifying, beautiful, uncontrollable pull toward another human being. It was the feeling of being truly seen, not for what I did or what I provided, but for who I was at the very core. I leaned into his palm, just a fraction of an inch, a surrender that felt like falling off a cliff. I saw his eyes darken, his pupils dilating in the dim light. The tension in the room was so thick, it felt like it had its own heartbeat, a heavy thrumming that echoed the storm outside. I wanted to stay in this bubble forever, in this cabin where the clocks had stopped, and the only thing that existed was the sound of the rain and the heat of his breath against my cheek. But as the minutes ticked by, the reality of the consequence began to settle in, cold and sobering. Every second I stayed in this moment was a second stolen from the life I had chosen, and the man who truly knew the person I had become, not just the girl I used to be. Mark knew the woman who liked her toast burnt, the woman who cried at insurance commercials, and the woman who worked 70 hours a week to build a future for us. Julian only knew the ghost of me. If I stayed, if I leaned in those last few centimeters and let the past become the present, I would be breaking something that might never be repaired. I would be a different woman when I walked out that door. A woman who knew she was capable of a betrayal that started in the heart and ended in the soul. I've spent a lot of time reflecting on that weekend and what it means to be truly honest with yourself. It's a strange thing to realize that you can love your life with everything you have and still feel the echo of a different path calling out to you in the dark. Looking back, I don't regret going to that cabin because it taught me that my stability isn't a lack of passion. It's a conscious, daily investment into a love that stays when the lightning fades. It taught me that the most romantic thing you can do for someone is to keep choosing them, even when you know exactly what you're giving up to do so. I often wonder how many of us carry these hidden rooms in our hearts, places where a certain person or a specific charged moment remains frozen in time like an insect in amber. I'd love to know if any of you have ever had a moment like that, where the past suddenly felt more real than the present, and you had to make a difficult choice about who you really are. Have you ever had to walk away from a what-if to save your now? Please share your thoughts or your own stories in the comments below. It helps to know we aren't alone in these complicated, messy, and deeply human experiences. If this story resonated with you, I'd be so grateful if you'd follow or subscribe for more of these real-life reflections. Your support means the world to me. Would you like me to share more about how I navigated the quiet aftermath of that trip and the ways it actually made my marriage stronger?